Welcome to another Web Rough Cuts. We're going to jump right back in on our work on this project by working on this layout next. This is the product list page where we have each of the products laid out in a sort of thumbnail fashion. So if we're doing a little bit of layout analysis, we might first realize that each of these products are a group of content with each one being composed of the image, the title for the product, and then another piece of data. I think here in the comp I had the ID numbers. In my actual build out I have prices, but that's okay. Very similar in nature, those pieces. Okay, so we're going to want to see each of them as a little group. Therefore, if we put groups around them, we can see that they overall, each group is kind of a tile in this overall layout. So we might realize that we need a container around all of them so that we can have that container be the actual Flexbox container. And then each one of these needs to be grouped together so that they can each succinctly be the tiles. Then we'll have a layout inside of each tile, but we'll come to that in just a moment. So first, let's make sure that we have that overall container and individual tiles set up going on. So this is in the productsindex.html file, where you can see that each of the products is a part of an li tag, and they are all organized by this ul tag. So that is actually perfect. So the product list class can be my Flexbox container. So there we have the class, and we can say display flex. And we're going to do flex flow row wrap and justify content space between. All right, now the list items inside of my product list right here are going to be the actual containers, and let's figure out what size we want them each to be. Let's see, it looks like 360 pixels is the approximate width of each. So let's say width 360 pixels. And we should see things attempt to snap into place. Now they don't. So there's an interesting little thing to figure out. Why are they not working? So let's take a look. We can see that we have the product list and the display flex settings are coming on there. So these li tags should be getting that. Oh, well, that's an easy fix right there. We could see it's crossed out. Why? Because it's invalid. There is no X after my P. Well, that's kind of nice. It looks like I had it here, but I didn't save or refresh in time. So let's just give it a good hard refresh. And let's see now. Yeah, it's still not going. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to close this and reopen it. Sometimes there can be a little bug with that. You can see it's still not working for me. You might have encountered this as well. I'm just going to come in here and click on it, just double checking my settings. All right. So what do you do if you're in that situation? Well, thankfully it solved itself for me, but if you ever run into that, the next thing you need to do is try to clear your browser cache. Might not hurt to close your browser down, reopen it, and get back logged into Codio. But now we can see we've got the overall layout going. However, the images did not resize. Why did they not resize? They did not resize because we only styled the width of the list items here, and the images are not going to, by default, obey the size of something around them. So you might have even found this earlier when you were working on the product individual pages as well. So let me show you a little trick. A great way to make sure that your images are never larger than their container is to use this setting, image max width 100%. That says never be larger than 100% of your container. So that's very nice in that now they are larger than their container, so that new rule will tell them to resize and be no wider than their containers. All right, looking much better. Okay, now the space between setting was clearly not the correct setting, however. You can see that we've got this undesired space between these. While the grid is kind of working out elsewhere, it's not quite what we wanted from our comp. Our comp shows that these should be 40 pixels apart and 20 pixels away from the edge. So it seems like the actual space around might be a better setting for these. So I'm going to go try to switch it to space around, and let's see what the result is. Okay, so good. It fixed what we wanted on the first row. However, the second row, that space that was all right here, is now evenly distributed around the items. So sad to say, our nice clean spacing setting here is just not going to cut it. Okay, so we're going to pull this out, and instead we're going to have to use margin on the product list items themselves. So we're going to say margin, 0 top and bottom, and 20 on left and right. If you think about it, 20 on left puts 20 here and here, and it puts 20 on right, puts it over here. So we would have 20 here, but then we'd have the 20 coming from this guy to make a total of 40 in between. Okay, so we basically split that down the middle, and I think we have a better solution that works for everyone. Yep, looking good. Now we do want space below all of these to the order of about 80 pixels. So I want to put margin on the bottom of these guys. So you may recall that when we do the box settings like this, margin and padding and borders both work this way. If we provide two settings like we had earlier, the first one applies to top and bottom, and the second applies to left and right. If we add just a third setting like this, it changes a little bit. Now this is only top, this one is still left and right, and this one is only bottom. And this is a pretty common thing we'll do. Of course, if we add a fourth value like this, now each one applies to one side. Top, right, bottom, left. Okay, but we don't need that one since if with just 3, this one will automatically apply to both sides. And we're good to go. We've got that nice spacing below. Everything is looking just right. All right, now let's talk about the layouts inside of each of those tiles, where in here, inside of this one group, we could see that the group itself is a container with 3 items inside of it. And in this case, each one could be a tile where this one is filling the whole width, and then the other 2 are being pushed down below with some spacing between them. So let's take a look at how we might do that. We're going to need to go on a container that wraps around all 3, where all 3 items are the direct child of that container. All right, what's that look like in our markup? In some cases, it might be the list item, but in this case, we actually have a hyperlink between the list item and the 3 items themselves. So that hyperlink is going to need to be our Flexbox container. So the product list A tag is going to get display flex, and it's going to get FlexFlow row wrap, our favorite. And I'm not sure about justify content space between or around. Let's do, let's actually do justify content space between. I think this will work out with a little bit of a modification. All right. So now we get a very interesting situation where these images appear to be stretched, but thankfully there's also an easy fix. Other than the stretching, we have the layout working more or less the way we want. So let's deal with the stretching. This is because that when you put the flex box settings on a container, the items inside of it get a default setting dealing with how they resize to kind of match their sizes, and that is called the align items setting. And so it's set to stretch by default, but we want it to be flex start, and then those images will not stretch anymore. Okay, very good, much better. Okay, so now let's look at our comp and imagine what we actually want to happen. So we need a little bit of margin below the images. So I'm going to go to product list, and I want to go to product list image. So it looks like I don't have a selector for that yet. Product list image. And if I want to put box model settings on an image, I need to remember that it is not block level by default. And block level elements are the only thing you can really reliably put box model settings on. So I need to make it a block level element by setting it to display block. It is inline by default. Now I can set some bottom margin, Let's figure out what we want that to be. Looks like the text box there and the image are about 11 pixels apart. So bottom margin 11 pixels. Let's see what that does for us. That looks good. Okay, so now we want a little bit of an inset on the left, a little bit of an inset on the right, and otherwise space between them to be the same. So that's where you might think that the space around could work, and I think it could. The question I have is, how wide do we want this text in here to get? Watch what happens when I make this text very wide. Pound, pound, pound. Okay, look how that ends up bumping this guy down to the next line. So what I'd like to do before I worry about the spacing is to control the width of this guy so that he will fit only as far as I want him to go for to have room for the price, and then would wrap around otherwise instead of bumping this down. So I'm going to go to my comp and measure that size. So you can see how I've got that kind of laid out where this one here has a set width and this one has a set width. So it looks like 260, in fact it looks like my boxes overlap a little bit, so I'm going to fix that before I think that either one of these is law. Let's say 60 is probably good there. 260, maybe we want a little bit of a gap between them. So let's try setting this one to 240. So that would be the product list name, width, 240 pixels. All right, now that wide one does not wrap, cause this one to wrap, but he wraps inside of his own space, and that is just right. Okay, now I bet I could use the space around setting and accomplish what I'm after. That looks pretty good. Okay, so I'll just clean up the little bit of goop that I added in there, and I think we can call this page done and ready to go. Okay, so there we have a pretty simple tile-based layout, and the whole product section is now ready to go. Let's move to the next most complicated one. That would be the article list layout. So here we are. In this case, we want to think pretty critically about the potential grouping that we have. I think it would be awfully tempting to look at this and imagine that we have one big column going down this way and another column going down this way. But hopefully from a logical grouping standpoint, you can see where the fault is in that. If we did that, we would be separating the images from the articles that they go with. So what we might instead realize is that we have a series of rows. Each row is composed of an image and the other data about the article. So here is a row, and here is a row, and here is a row. Okay? So we actually wouldn't need to do much with those rows as a whole, in that they should normally stack that way. So if we look at this, they are stacking one on top of the other. It's just that inside of each row, we have a compound layout happening, where now inside of one row, so the row is the container, we have an image in one column, and we have all of the other content in the other column. So this actually ends up being very similar to the product page, where we have an image in one column and all the other stuff in the other column. So we're going to do something very similar here as to what we did there, where we're going to make sure that we have a container around this one image and a container around all of these elements. And then we can make the container that's around this whole group be the Flexbox container, and these two groups be the actual tiles that we size up side by side. So let's go take a look at the markup for that page. That would be the article main page. And here you can see that we have an A tag around the image. So that could be my container for the left-hand side. But I would need to add a group around this stuff. So we could say article intro. And then we make sure that it closes around the bottom. Okay, so now we have a single container for the image and a single container for the group of stuff that goes on the right, and we would say that the Flexbox container is the list item. So let's just make sure we get these settings duplicated down to each of the rows below. All right, so I've got those settings on each one of my items here, and I'm ready to get going with my layout settings. So I'm going to go to the article list LIs and make them display flex. We'll do justify content row wrap. Okay, and I'm not going to worry about the spacing setting for now. So then inside of each of those, we had the A tags, which it'd be nice if I had a class on them, since I have many A tags directly or inside of these items in various places. So I'm just going to put a class of article image link. If you were curious about how I did that little bit of magic, I just held the command or control button on a PC, command on a Mac, and clicked each time, and then I had a cursor remain in each of those spots that I could easily type in the same thing in each of those places. Okay, so the article image link, and it's inside of article list. I'm going to kind of keep that context. So we're going to go here, and I want just to clarify that we're inside of the article lists. Okay, so those guys are going to need to get a width of about 360 pixels. And then we want the other guys, the article list, article intro, right? Yep. They are going to need to be how wide? At least 630 pixels. Turn on my grid. Looks like I actually have my paragraphs no wider than 560 pixels. So let's go with 560. There we go. Okay, and they have a gap between them. And so if I wanted to do these space around or space between, I would have to have these things spanning the whole width of the page, and they're not doing that. So I'm going to do a little bit of margin on the left and the right. Let's do to the order of 20 pixels on both of these. Okay, and then we'll need a little bit below them so that they always get pushed about the right amount away. But you know what? I think I will put that bottom margin on the list items themselves so that the container that wraps around all of these guys always enforces that wherever the bottom is. So how much was that again? Looks like about 40 pixels. Okay, so there we go. With just a little bit of CSS magic, we've quickly assembled this overall layout. And since the article pages themselves are doing what they're supposed to do, we can now say that the article section is all done. Now for the most fun page of all, the fancy home page. So what do we have going on the home page? You may recall that in this case, if we're going to do layout analysis, we have a group of recent news and a group of featured products. So we would want a container around both of those groups, but we could realize that this one group is kind of occupying the left 2/3 of the canvas, while the other group is occupying the right 2/3. So we want a container around both groups, but we then want to make sure we have a succinct group of the news and a succinct group of the featured articles. So let's see what we actually have. Okay, looks like we have some work to do. So on one hand, the main tag wraps around all of that stuff. So that could be our main Flexbox container. So we're going to say page home. Yeah. Okay, so page home is going to get display flex. However, we're going to need to group all of the article stuff separately from all of the featured product stuff. So we're going to want to go in here and put a group around this guy, div class of home articles. And here we'll have a div class of home products. All right, so now we have the containers we need. We have the overall container and we have the tile containers, and so we're ready to go. So page home gets to be display flex. Flex flow row wrap. And I think I'm going to be intelligent here, and we're going to do the justify content space around setting. Except we got to do it right. All right, there we go. So then we had the home articles, and it needs a specific width. That 2/3 width looks like is about 760 pixels. And then the home products, they're probably 360. All right, let's see what magic we did here. Okay, so it doesn't quite look the way we want in the end, but we're making progress, right? Because we have the left 2/3 and the right 2/3, and it's separated out based on the actual items, so that is good. But there's lots to do. Let's start on the easy side, on the right-hand side where we have the featured products. Notice that over here we want them to span the full 360 pixels, but as they are, they're being pushed in a little bit. Looks like we had once upon a time set them for 360 from the other page, but because of the margin that we have, that's actually ending up restricting them a little bit more. So we want to change the settings on these guys in the context of the home products area. So the normal products list LIs can keep that for the other page, but we're going to now create a little bit more fancy of a selector here for home products, product list LIs, and we're going to zero out that margin. Okay, so now they fill out the space there. Oops, and I realized that what I wanted to do was actually, oh, I guess we can leave it that way. Because there was bottom margin, but it's different here than it was on the other page. Here we want specifically 30 pixels. So I want 0 on left and 0 on top, 0 on left and right, and 30 pixels on bottom. Okay, so now those are spaced out more the way we want, and all the other settings remain the same because our markup here matches the markup that we had from the actual article page itself. So we don't need any more magic here. Okay, so now we need to take a look at the harder side, the left side over here. So let's look at the layout we have and do a little bit more layout analysis. So on this side, you can see, you could imagine that this guy and this guy are stacking on top of each other. So maybe they're a little bit normal. But now down here is where things get interesting. So we could imagine that this area right here is a group of articles with 1 article, 2 article, 3 articles, right? But now the first one is just spanning 100% of the width, while the others are doing a 2 up. So they are fixed at kind of a 360 pixels. So if we wanted to do that, we would want to make sure that we have a container around all 3 articles, and then a succinct container around each of the articles themselves. So let's see what we have. Perfect. We have the article list around the whole group, and then 1, 2, 3 articles distinctly. One other thing we might want to do is distinguish this first one from the other 2, something like this, so that we can tell it to be a little bit different. So now we're going to go article list, but specifically inside of home articles, since we have this same class on our other page. We don't want to goof that up. So we're going to go home articles, article list, display flex, justify content. Oops, nope, that's not the right one. Flex flow, space between. Getting them all mixed up here. Flex flow row wrap. There we go. All right, let's fix the typo. Thank you, Codio, for cluing me into that. I won't worry about the spacing for now. That'll do. So now I want to select the LIs inside of the home articles article list. And they're going to be 360 pixels by default. But that one that is the featured article needs to be width 100%. Okay, so let's see what we get. Okay, excuse me. Progress for sure, in that we can see this guy is filling 100%. Now the items inside are doing the Flexbox thing, which is totally understandable, because this is something that it's inheriting from the other page's settings. On the other page, we told these article list items to have Flexbox, right? And I can see I have a typo over there I need to fix too. Amazing that it still worked. So let's go fix that while we're looking at it. That would be article list. Justify content. So that should be flex flow, of course. All right. Yeah, it still worked because we had the width settings on those guys. But anyway, back to the problem here. Yes, so they have the Flexbox stuff on. So all of the items inside of them would be tiling up, except now that we have that FlexFlow row wrap in place, now they're only tiling up to the extent that they must because of their inherent width. So this image is filling the full space, and the other stuff is getting pushed below. Well, we'll have more work to do up here, but you can see that the overall desired effect is being achieved down below here. That's very nice. Okay, but in order to get all of this stuff to work out a little bit more that we'd like, we want a little bit of space between these. But our auto settings of justify content space between or space around, actually, you know, space between might be just right. Let's give that one a shot. Home article list, justify content, space between. Hey, look at that. Gave us exactly the gap that we wanted there. All right, we're going to leave that alone, call that good, and focus on this top area up here. So now this is an example of where we have one of the situations that would be considered a bit of an exception in our layout analysis, in that we actually have this stuff stacking up on top of this image. So inside of that, we have these two things side by side. But it's a whole lot easier to see the layout if we basically ignore the image and imagine that that image is not part of the markup to consider, but part of the background. So let's do that before we do anything else. Let's pull the image out of the markup, and instead of putting it in the markup as a hard-coded image, let's go in here and do an inline style where we set the background image be URL, and then we paste in that path that we had. Okay, I'm keeping it here because as a content editor, I might want to change that out easily from one time to the next. Next time I come in and put in a new article, I'd like to not have to go edit my style sheet to put the updated article image in here. But what we get at least then is that we get that background image being applied to the list item and not through the image itself. So now that it's on the background, we don't have that image telling this box how tall it needs to be. So I want to imagine what general height I would want. You can see that the images are all a little bit different in size. This one happens to be 420 pixels tall. So that's a setting I might want to keep beyond any particular image. So let's try putting that setting in here in my style sheet. So height, 420 pixels. And you can see now that that container stretches to be more the height that we're looking for. So that is very good. Now, how do we get that content to push down? Well, we can do this with the box model setting of padding. But before we go and add padding willy-nilly, we want to remember that we can make life a lot easier by adding the box sizing border box setting that makes sure that padding and borders get included inside of width and height. So now when we say padding top, and we measure that it's about 370 pixels, that is simply going to be space inside of that box pushing this title down to just about where we want it, right? And then they're already kind of tiling up here, again, because we have Flexbox on article list LIs by default. And they happen to fit side by side, although not exactly where we want them because they're naturally small enough to fit in that space. So we've got a couple of text modifications that we want to do in that the featured article H3 here should be bold, but it should be my white color, and it should be 2.3 rem. So let's make sure that that gets updated. That would be my featured article. Yeah, that guy. So I'm going to go put a new selector for him, keeping it simple. We don't need all the other stuff because this is just an H3 setting. So color, font size, and let's see if that affected it as we planned. Okay, so it did on the size, but not on the color. Why is that? We have told article list H3As to be that gray color, so we're going to need to modify this a little bit more. We will move the color setting down to this one because we want to override the article list H3As and instead get the featured articles H3As. Okay, that's looking better. Now I want them to get spaced out, but I want to imagine once again, like we did with the product, how wide we might want this to go before we would want it to wrap in case that title was ever long enough. Looks like 600 pixels would be a good limit. So let's go in here and say width 600 pixels. All right. Now let's also imagine, looks like I don't have the right settings on this guy. 1.4, I think he should be bold. But other than that, anything else? Nope. Okay, he's looking all right. But he is kind of pushed over to the right-hand edge there for sure. Read more, read more. Yep. Okay, so let's do featured article. Read more. Font weight 600. Text align. Right. And let's give it a width. How wide? So if this guy's there, and this guy's here, looks like he's about 90. So let's try that. Fix it at 90 pixels. Make sure we didn't goof him up. All right, he looks okay. Oh wait, no, he didn't change because I don't have the class of read more. Okay, there he is. That's looking better. Okay, so now we can do the space between setting on my featured article inside of home articles, article list. Yes. Justify content, space around actually. Okay, so we get the little bit of inset, the little bit of inset here, space between them. Now all I want to do is just kind of make sure that the baselines for these two guys are aligned. See how they're offset from each other? I want to know how much. On a Mac I hit Command-Shift-4 and that gives me this little tool that's supposed to take a screenshot, but it does actually a very nice job at measuring dimensions. But when I'm done measuring, before I let go of my mouse, I just press Escape. So that was 7 pixels of difference, so I'm going to shoot for 7 pixels of top margin on that read more. See if we got close enough. That looks like too much now. Way too much. So let's try 4. Good. Okay, so I'm happy with that. We can click to view the article. We can go back. And this whole article layout is looking pretty good. All right, a few other things to fine tune. We've got the navigation bar to snap in place, which should be pretty quick. After some quick layout analysis, we can see that these all should just simply be tiling up with a good bit of right margin between them. So that's a very simple matter of finding the direct container around those tiling items. So the tiling items would be the LIs. The direct parent would be the UL. So that is a UL inside of nav. So here we have nav UL, display flex. And I'm not going to worry about any of the other settings. These guys just now need some margin right. Let's start at 80 pixels. Okay, so they are tiling up the way that we want them to from the layout, and they've got a healthy amount of space between them, so we are good to go. I just might instead put a little bit of margin on the left as well so that we get that inset edge. So margin left, 20 pixels to keep up with the spacing we have elsewhere. Actually, this has it hugging the outer edge, doesn't it? Looks, okay, I know what the problem is. So notice that when I did that margin on the left, what it did is it pushed home and the border over, and what we actually have in the comp is spacing around the words but still showing the border. So that means we would want to go into the nav A tags, and let's make them display blocks so we can do some box model stuff with them. And let's set some padding. Let's do 0 on top, 20 on left and right, and let's do 5 below. Okay, so you can see that space things out more like what we might be after, so we don't need that margin left anymore. But I think that this was too much. Let's do 0, and let's do a little bit on the top instead. There. So now we have a nice large hit space for them as well. Everything works. We can move between pages rather smoothly. And I think we are good to go. Well, I hope your project works out as well as this, and if not, of course, ask some questions and folks will be happy to help. Good luck.